Fáilte! Welcome back to another episode of Crann, Stories and Poetry. I'm Terrance Ó Domhnaill, your village scéalaí, returning again this week after my holiday with more stories and poems from authors around the world. This week I have 3 stories and 2 poems. I continue with the Grave Diggers of Orpheus, Chapter 10, another short, scary story from the same author, a scary Irish story from a medium writer, and 2 poems. I'll be reading one of my own scary poems this week, as this is the last show before Samhain, and finish up with a nice thought-provoking meditative poem from Bulgaria. So some notes about future changes to this show. I had talked before about making some changes regarding the show starting in November, and I decided to stretch things out a bit. I will continue the current schedule and title until next July, but I'll be uploading the shows under the Village Oak Tree heading on rss.com starting in November. The same for my Substack page. By next July, everything will be under that heading, and Crann Stories and Poetry as a separate show will cease. I figured it would be better for everyone if I changed things up slowly rather than doing anything abrupt. So with all that out of the way, gather around once more and let me read to you under the shade of the Crann, the Tree of Life. And as mentioned, my first story this week is a continuation of the Grave Diggers of Orpheus, Chapter 10, by Catherine Elaine. Derek stood watching Doc Liz behind the glass wall of the operation room. Doc had never looked more tired and miserable. Her white overall was covered in black stains from the Murblard's blood. She looked at Derek and showed a thumbs up. Derek nodded. The Green Giant took up whole 2 operation beds. The medbots hovered around, cleaning up and disinfecting the room. The slow beeping of the life support equipment marked each second of the Murblard's saved life. Derek waited until Liz got out of the shower. "You owe me big time," she said, "to make me operate on that chunk of green meat." Doc Liz shook her head. "Thank you, Doc. You're the best." Derek gave her a tired smile. "Don't waste your charms on me, Cap. There's someone else whom you should be wooing." Doc Liz replied with all wrinkles and lines on her old face rising in ridicule. Derek swallowed hard. Doc could see straight through him, as always. He nodded and marched away slowly. Derek stood by Sophie's cabin. Heart pounding, palms sweating, lump in throat, heat rising up his face. Yep, just as it's supposed to be. Derek remembered the feeling all too well. For a second he hoped Sophie had fallen asleep, until the door swished open and Sophie took him by the hand. She didn't wait for Derek to start stuttering. Sophie kissed him. Minutes passed in sweet oblivion, holding each other close, until Sophie pulled him to her bed. Derek stood unmoved. "What's wrong? I thought," Sophie murmured nervously, fidgeting with the zipper on his uniform to undo it. I've been raised according to the code of old beliefs," Derek stuttered. Sophie glanced over his body. Derek was a handsome, muscled man in his mid-30s, black hair, gray eyes, a real catch. Have you ever been with a woman?" "Yes, I have," Derek replied with a nervous smile. "My wife." "You have a wife?" "I had a wife. I buried her." Derek paused to take a deep breath. "The ghouls, she got caught in a shooting between the ghouls and the rebel forces. There were no available grave diggers in our area. I gathered some men and we buried the dead ourselves. After that, I formed an official grave digger crew. We got the Vulture 05. The silent pause lingered, interrupted only by baby Anouk cooing in her sleep. Sophie held Derek's hands. "I'm sorry about that." "It's been 10 years. I'm all right," he said sternly. "What is the old code of beliefs?" "In the oldest parts of Orpheus, there is a code according to which a man and a woman should share a bed only after wedding," Derek explained quietly. "Oh, that's—" Now it's Sophie's turn to stutter. To her great surprise, Derek got on one knee. Though his hands shook, he had obviously gathered all his courage to ask her the question. "Will you be my wife? I don't have a ring, but when I get the chance." Sophie stood blinking. "I will," she finally replied. Baby Anouk woke crying. It took Sophie a while to soothe her back to sleep. Derek watched Sophie holding the baby gently to her heart. She hummed a melody he hadn't heard since childhood. Exhausted, The gravedigger captain sat on Sophie's narrow bed, leaned back against the cold wall of Vulture 05, and slipped into a peaceful dream. My next story is also by Catherine Elaine, and this is a horror story entitled Ferns. "Come, come, my love," he whispered, as the two skipped and ran onward through the meadow like two butterflies, dancing and weaving around each other. Their kisses tasted sweeter than ever on the warm midsummer's night. They touched and teased. The first stars born in the dusky blue sky guided their steps. They did not listen to the well-meant advices of the old, wait until the wedding. They laughed and brushed off the warnings. Don't go into the woods on midsummer's night. The wedding was set in 2 days. What difference does a day or two make? What harm would an early wedding night on the soft moss cause? With the stars shining above, the forest singing its love song in the language of the nightingales, the deep green ferns hiding their young and hot bodies from the judging eyes of old. "Come, I'll show you where the ferns bloom," she whispered sweetly. "Ferns do not bloom," he teased, holding her close in the darkness. "They say the ferns bloom on midsummer's night, but only for lovers to see." Her soft whisper tickled his ear. He laughed, kissed his beloved, and they ran into the sea of dark ferns underneath the forest trees. There he laid his beloved in the sea of ferns. The magic of the midsummer's night brought all her desires to life. The fireflies mirrored the stars above. The ferns exhaled clouds of softly glittering spores. The two lovers inhaled it deeply. The cries of lust broke into the nightingale's song until it turned to screams of terror and pain. The ferns did bloom. The tiny spores found fruitful soil in the lungs of the young lovers. The magic of ferns was dark. Not an hour had passed when the lovers, tortured by pain in their chest, tore their own skin open with their fingernails. Alas, too late. The devious fern children ripped their chest open from inside, and monstrous flowers opened their meaty petals. Bloody flowers of lust, they bloomed in the open chest of the dead lovers, emitting their sickly sweet scent. Dark moths danced in the starlight. The nightingale's song turned wicked, mocking the hasty fools in love. The ferns feasted and bloomed, until the light of the dawning day chased away the short midsummer's night. The fern flowers withered. The luscious green leaves hid the bodies, never to be seen again, for the flowers of the ferns were a secret kept by the lovers and the dead. That's kind of the start of scary stories. So now I have a rather lengthy story here. This is called this is a kind of a magical Irish story. It's entitled "The Arianna Treasure: A Mantle of Feminine Power" by author D. Denise Diani. For hours now, she flitted through the freezing forest, evading the thieving blighters. All Granny had told her was to follow the call, and that it will come to you with the gloaming, she said. Euphemia had laid low in the cold damp of the deep forest since late morning. The voice came as the old woman had promised, at dusk, a haunting murmur on the wind merging with the night chorus, calling, leading deeper into the woods. The woods seemed to be denser and deeper than she knew them in daylight. She'd grown up roaming these woods with Granny and Mum, but the deeper the voice led her, the more unreal the forest became. And yet, there was a knowing in the depths of her soul of every leaf and stone. Ian would probably say it was quantum. The voice led her along a path, appearing as she stepped. The path circled upward through the high forest toward the peak of the crag. As she ascended, the trek became labored, and she puffed many clouds with every breath in the cold air. "Why didn't you just give up the treasure, old woman?" she mused. "But no, you're determined the Arianna treasure must pass to me." Euphemia didn't want the treasure. "It's just tat, a couple of blackened old Celtic artifacts only a museum would want," she fumed, as she continued following where the voice led, running lightly between the trees. She ran for hours, more through the velvety darkness of advancing night. The old woman had been trying to convince Euphemia to accept the gift ever since her mum had died. Euphemia wanted neither treasure nor gift. It should have been Mum, her heart wailed. For a full year, she'd been able to fend off all Granny's machinations. Granny began telling her all the time that the gift would fade if she didn't take up the mantle before the year was gone. Fine by me, she thought furiously. In a month, it will be a year past since Mum died. So naturally, Euphemia had first thought this whole thing today, on a rare full moon Samhain of all days, was another of the old woman's Fáilte to get her to carry the mantle, as Granny called it. Some distance behind her, Euphemia heard the men who had been chasing her for that treasure since this morning. These were the same blighters who had broken down the college door and dragged her and Ian out before school into the cold, misty morning without even a jumper. When Ian kicked the man she'd been struggling against, Euphemia had been able to break free. That was when she knew this was no prank. One of the men pulled a gun from his pocket and struck down at Ian's temple with the butt. When she saw her brother's hand come away with blood, she started to rush back to his side, but he waved her off. "Run, Effie!" She turned and fled. A reverberating pop rang out, echoing around and up the lane as the sun's first rays fell upon the village hedgerows. Euphemia felt a tiny gust of wind as something whistling whizzed past her shoulder. All these hours later, in the late night, sound traveled strangely around this primordial forest. Her musing was interrupted by the echoing sounds of the men bashing their way through the undergrowth. Shouting and cursing angrily, they crashed and bumbled through the woods. Euphemia could tell from the sounds that they'd lost her trail and were moving away from her. Then a younger voice cried out in pain. Before she could stop herself, she called out her brother's name in alarm. "Ian!" He answered back reflexively, "Effie!" The men shouted mockingly, "Effie! Effie!" She squinted briefly angrily at their taunts. One of them raised at her, "It'll be the worse for you both if you don't give over." Loudly beating the forest undergrowth ahead of them, the men were heading in her direction now. She turned and fled, racing through the trees. Fleet-footed, Euphemia quickly outpaced them, barely making a sound. "This is so stupid. What's the old woman going to do about those bruisers?" A sudden stitch in her side made Euphemia hunch over. She mustn't stop, though. Heaving and out of breath, but still running as fast as possible, she lurched onward. Scrambling between the trees, she spotted an opening in the forest. It was moon-high on Samhain when Euphemia stumbled out of the dense forest. Euphemia paused for a breath of gratitude for the warm, dancing wind. She halted at the edge of the clearing she'd always known. Now she had a knowing, but this wasn't the place she'd always known. Before her now was a place beyond this earth. The heart of the clearing was magically verdant, otherworldly and bathed in ethereal silver moonlight. Clinging to a gnarled hollow tree, the earthy musk of oak moss filled her nostrils as lichen crumbled under her fingers. Rot dampish wood broke away from the opening to the hollow. Euphemia pushed her frazzled braid over her shoulder. At first, she only heard the thumping of her heart. With a will, she quieted her breathing, listening intently. Carried on the wind, the sounds of darkness filled the night, and that haunting call made of the sounds of the night came to her, directing her to search the hollow. The sorceress of the forest night chorus felt welcoming. Breathing easier, she plunged an arm deep into the hollow's recess and froze in a moment of elated relief. Just like the old girl said. Euphemia retrieved something wrapped in a ragged linen cloth. Hand shaking, she frenetically discarded the linen, revealing a soft tapestry bag. Her breath caught as she drew out the artifacts, no longer crusty and blackened with age. She'd never seen them like this. The disc was now a shining, finely wrought silver wheel, and the old stick was a sculpted, curling, pale birchwood wand. The artifacts were artfully bound together by a new-looking willow bark twisted into a complicated Celtic knotted rope. The silver wheel detail of the disc was also stamped in gleaming silver on the hilt of the wand. She turned the disc over and over in her hands, admiring the handiwork of some long-forgotten silversmith as she unwound the rope. Art and light danced across the bas-relief of the Celtic knot pattern on the wheel. Forming the wheel's hub, the central sigil kept her rapt gaze. The sigil glowed from within. Beautiful, she breathed in wonder. As beautiful as it was, she knew, holding it in her hands, she confidently declared a knowing. This is never Erinrod's treasure. A loud crack of breaking branches came from the forest behind her, crashing sounds and rough voices coming closer. Hurriedly kicking off her shoes, Euphemia glanced quickly over her shoulder towards the threat. She reverently brushed her fingertips across the lighted sigil. Euphemia's body went rigid and absorbed the light, absorbed the sigil, brilliant and luminous as moonlight. Simultaneously, the moon's silvery light beamed blindingly into the clearing. Euphemia, arms wide, murmured in a pulsating drone. Her voice merged with the night symphony and rose with the haunting call as she was propelled by an unseen force across the clearing to the very center. Coruscating light undulated around her and then around the wheel in one hand and the wand in the other. Energy pulsed like a heartbeat up from the ground, through her bare feet and into her. Euphemia directed the energy flow through her and into the wand which she aimed at the ground. At the same time, she gently wafted the seemingly weightless silver wheel to float from her hand and hover above her head. The silver wheel spun gently as it expanded. While it expanded and spun, it was descending to settle on the ground with Euphemia at its center. She was the hub. Her bare feet still rested upon the grassy, fecund earth in the space where the wheel's sigil had been. A magnificent, silvery gray dire wolf appeared out of the forest, came to stand at her side as a majestic snowy owl glided across the clearing, coming to rest on her shoulder. Behind Euphemia, two large men barreled across the forest edge. Ahead of them, they compelled a preternaturally calm teen with a trickle of blood at his temple. Staring at the tableau before them, the men tossed aside the thick branches they had used to beat the bush. A shimmering female apparition appeared behind the boy, between the men. Startled by her sudden appearance, the men jumped several paces away from her. The figure's form was glowing but indistinct. A tendril hinting at a hand reached out to Ian. Where it stroked the boy's cheek, a sigil glowed briefly. The figure faded as a voice like wind said, "Rus de Josen, Abrahar." Ian took a step back, but one of the men rushed him and shoved him to the ground. "Stay put, runt," he growled at the teen. Both men started toward Euphemia, whose back was still turned. Neither noticed the boy furtively kick off his shoes. The men were about to cross the wheel when they stopped short, unnerved by Euphemia suddenly facing them. She didn't turn or move. She was just facing them. One of the men blustered. "You ran us to hell and gone for this light show?" He gestured around the clearing. His buddy aimed a pistol at her, adding menacingly, "Light don't stop bullets. Stop mucking about and give us the area our treasure." She locked eyes with the armed man as the corner of her mouth stretched in a slow, creeping smile. A look of horror crept into his eyes. He couldn't look away and couldn't move. The gun fell from his nerveless fingers. He found himself in the center of the wheel, nose to nose with her, as Euphemia whispered, "I am Aaronrod's treasure." The light of the sigil flared in her eyes, and just as suddenly, the man was back next to his partner in crime. In the same breath of time, a whirring wind rose as the men determinedly surged forward to grab Euphemia. In the same moment, a colossal apparition of light expanded up from the wheel, forming with Euphemia at the center. The apparition became a transparent, flowing goddess in flowing robes and bare feet, wearing a diadem with a crescent moon among stars. The lunging man rebounded violently off the sparking edge of the apparition. Vines and roots shot from between the trees, reaching across the clearing to entwine themselves about the men. The men clutched and clawed at the earth as they were inexorably dragged back towards the forest edge. As they writhed against the living restraints, they reached for the boy's legs. Both bellowed in pain when an arc of electricity sparked and flung their clutching fist away from the boy. And as they were dragged from the clearing, the furrows they gouged down to the bare soil folded over and knitted themselves together until no sign remained of the men. Euphemia rushed to Ian's side. "Did they hurt you?" Fixated on the self-repairing earth, he mumbled, "I'm okay, Effie," while pulling on his shoes. Euphemia only barely winced at the hated nickname as she helped him to his feet. "Granny said it would come all right," he added with a sparkling, toothy grin. As they were talking, a rustling wind swirled about them, carrying fallen leaves dancing across their vision. The wind died as quickly as it had risen, letting the leaves rain down. As the leaves fell, the otherworldly verdant green of the clearing shifted to the dampish dead grass, more normal for this time of year, and the cold. The cold came rushing back, prickling along the skin of her arms under the thin blouse. The owl on Euphemia's shoulder protested as she bent to pick up the wheel and wand. The artifacts had returned to the old blackened state, she remembered, as she reverently bound them with the now decaying willow rope and placed them back in the bag. Looking around for the linen cloth, she spotted it waving gently in the wind where it snagged on a tree branch. She started toward it until it lifted off the branch and floated toward her. As the cloth neared, the glowing goddess appeared. She was clothed in flowing robes with bare feet and wearing a diadem with crescent moon among the stars. The goddess smiled with a twinkle in her eye as she held out the cloth for Euphemia. The owl fluttered from Euphemia over to the goddess' shoulder. As the glow faded from the goddess' form, the owl's appearance shifted from the majestic snowy owl to an ordinary, rather scruffy little owl. While trying to put his shoes back on, Ian was being nuzzled aggressively by the wolf as it morphed back into Granny's old deerhound. Euphemia sighed in overwhelmed relief and returned the goddess' smile. Then her mind replayed the day of racing about in terror and almost dying, and we could have died, Granny. She turned to face the goddess beside her as she paced back to where she had left her shoes next to the hollow tree. Following, the goddess chucked her under the chin. Right, sorry I am too, but you had to get them to this grove for me to summon the goddess. The glamour of Arion and the goddess fell away, leaving old Granny, as she took the bundle from Euphemia and placed it back in the hollow of the tree. This is where I could handle the Aegis. This place held the last of me power. Her tatty-party favorite diadem tilted rakishly while she rooted around in the recess of the hollow and came up with a triumph, grinning, "Me shoes!" Smiling indulgently, Euphemia gave the old woman her arm and held her hand. Granny continued as she patted her hand, "And the power's passed to you now, Effie." Epilogue. The old woman turned Euphemia's hand over and showed her, invisible in a beam of moonlight, the sigil of Arion glowing in the palm of her hand. But she already knew that. Euphemia had felt the knowing the moment she touched the sigil. Incongruously, Ian interjected, "Excellent demonstration. Crypto-phenomenological illusion," as he took Granny's other arm. "Krypton-pheno, what's it, illusion?" Granny demanded, and in the same breath continued, "That was no illusion, boy." She yanked her arm away from his support and snapped her fingers in front of his face, catching the tip of his nose. Skipping a few paces ahead, Ian opened his mouth to placate her. However, when put up his hands in acquiescence, moon-bright light coruscated through his digits and sparked off his fingertips. Granny made to step bumptiously around him, but he stopped short in his tracks, staring in wonderment at his own fingers. His grandmother curiously chided him for bringing her up short as he scrambled to keep them both from tumbling to the ground. Euphemia stepped around them both, letting their chatter fade dreamily to the background. The theme of their argument wasn't new. Ian would work himself around to "it be quantum." Granny liked the word quantum. To her, the word and the way her grandson explained it, quantum, was just explaining magic. And Ian liked quantum because magic can't be real. So everything must be quantum. And there it was. She caught the word, and their conversation shifted as Ian launched into a long supposition about the quantum of the goddess' power. Euphemia held out her own hand before her. A silver light sparked in her palm. Concentrating, she made 4 more sparks appear, then made them dance briefly on her palm before extinguishing them with a pleased smile, a smile of knowing. And so now I'm going to read a scary poem. Now this is one that I wrote last year, and I published it on Medium, and I tweaked it a little bit to make it sound a little better here, this for reading purposes here for all of you. So this is entitled "The Hunger" by Terrance Ó Domhnaill. This is entitled "The Hunger" by Terrance Ó Domhnaill. She wakes up from her slumber, so hungry, so hungry. The old crypt where she lies, still hidden for now, so hungry, so hungry. She fed last night, but it was just a child, not enough to satisfy her incessant hunger. Chased away before finding another, so hungry, so hungry. She must hunt again tonight in hopes of finding more prey, so hungry, so hungry. The villagers will be aware and looking for her now, so hungry, so hungry. She glides out of the cemetery, just a whisper in the night, on the hunt once again, so hungry, so hungry. She drifts through the trees, no more than a shadow, to find the village lit up like the day. Men milling about with torches, peering into the dark woods around, so hungry, so hungry. She knows her time here is finished, and she must move on once again, but first she must satisfy her hunger before leaving this village for another. So hungry, so hungry. She needs an adult full of life to satisfy her needs tonight. She must be patient like any predator, stalking her kill, waiting for just the right moment to strike and to kill. so hungry, so hungry. She glides between the trees, barely a shadow in the dark, watching and waiting with predatory eyes. Soon enough, she spies a human all alone, standing at the edge of the darkness, so hungry, so hungry. She strikes with no more than a whisper, catching her prey by surprise, taking him down with beguile and a bite. For she is a comely predator, beautiful to look at, with her long dark hair and pleasing figure, using illusion to mask her true looks, so hungry, so hungry. She feasted on her kill, wary of more hunters, slaking her thirst by draining him dry. Her hunger abated, she fades into the shadows, searching for more. But for the moment she is content. The gnawing hunger is diminished, but not satisfied just yet. Now she craves the hunt, more than their blood. So hungry, so hungry. Maybe she will find another she can lure from the herd to satisfy her hunger this night before leaving for easier prey in another village far away. Such is the life of she who hunts the night, always so hungry, so hungry. And now my last one, I have a poem that's entitled A New Day Comes with the Dawn by Mariana Bosarova. In the morning, rain droplets sing, a thin and ringing refrain. Cat-like footsteps quietly bring a mark for a new day's chance. Minutes purr in tune with the hush. We shiver with the wind's bite. Someone's breathless in a rush, throws on a coat. It's cold, right? Like a dragon, a truck rolls by, an old rusty refuse machine. Yet still I dream of the blue sky, it lingers here so serene. Leaves are painted in color so bright, of ripe yellow honey sweet. This October has no claims in sight, as if it dreams us to meet. In towers of wind that softly sings its untamed lingering tone, morning is here, some hope to bring, a new day waits with the dawn. So that's all I have for you this week. I hope you enjoyed everything, and I'll be back again next week with more stories to start off the new year. Sláinte. Guru Mahagat. Thank you for listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed the variety of stories and poems again this week. If you like the show, please like, subscribe, and reply, as this goes a long way towards reaching more listeners around the world. As a Shanke, I hope you will allow me to continue delighting you with a story or poem here under the crown of beatha. Maybe they will bring you a smile, take you away from your troubles for a time. As I say goodbye this week, I wish to leave you with this Irish blessing as you go about your day. May your path rise up to meet you, and the sun warm your bonnet as you walk down the lane to the pub. May your friends and relations bring you a pint after you retell these stories and poems I give you here. Slán go fóill. Goodbye for now.